Chapter 21. After the charming concubine became pregnant, the emperor doted on him every night. 21. You are listening at novelfull.audio. No way. Me. Have feelings for the emperor? I just think he's been really good to me, so I appreciate him. The system just smirked at her denial. Often, real love blossoms from simple appreciation. But she doesn't know that yet. The system was just waiting for reality to hit her. While other systems might discourage their hosts from falling for the target, this one was different. It never objected to anything she wanted. As long as she was happy, she could do whatever. It didn't interfere, didn't push, just let things unfold. It was just a system, aware of itself, and felt interfering with human emotions would be inappropriate. Besides, it was a childbirth system, not a relationship expert. It was a machine. What did it know about love? What right did it have to meddle? Okay, the system replied calmly, without giving much away. Xiao Zhenye felt like today's court session dragged on forever. He was getting impatient while the officials droned on and on. He rubbed his temples, and said irritably, "Can we wrap this up? Let's reconvene when you've actually agreed on something." Without waiting for a response, he stood up from the throne and left, his face unreadable. He didn't even glance back, as if afraid the officials would try to stop him. The courtiers exchanged confused looks, wondering what had gotten into the emperor. It seemed he couldn't wait to get away from them. After leaving court, Xiao Zhenye didn't rush to see Yun Yuran. First, he tackled the pile of official documents. It wasn't that he didn't want to see Yun Yuran, but he was worried his eagerness might cause gossip. He wanted to get through the important stuff so he could enjoy a peaceful evening with her. The thought of her seductive allure made him restless. He stood up abruptly, grabbed his cold tea, and gulped it down. The chill in his stomach offered a moment of relief. Whenever he thought about Yun Yuran, he felt consumed, like he was losing control. Yun Yuran entered the palace with her two hand-picked maids, Chun Hua and Qiu Yu. Although she didn't know them well, she wanted her own people around her. She'd train them in time. Chun Hua approached Yun Yuran cautiously. "Your Majesty, let me fetch some hot water so you can wash up and relax." She wasn't sure what her new mistress was like, so she had to tread carefully to avoid offense. "Okay," Yun Yuran replied evenly. She didn't react to the maid's guarded demeanor. It was understandable to be cautious around strangers. She was wary of them, too. Since it was still early, she decided to pay her respects to the queen and queen mother. After washing up and dressing, it was almost noon. As she was about to head to the queen mother's palace, a young eunuch hurried in and bowed respectfully. "Your Majesty, the emperor is on his way here." Yun Yuran was surprised. She'd assumed the emperor wouldn't come until night. She hadn't expected him so soon. As Yun Yuran stepped outside, the emperor strode toward her. "Greetings, Your Majesty," she curtsied, her voice honeyed. Xiao Zhenye took her hand and gently lifted her up. "No need for formalities, my dear." "Thank you, Your Majesty." She smiled, her eyes sparkling with delight. She was already beautiful, but with a little effort, she looked absolutely stunning, practically irresistible. "Are you settling in okay? Is everything to your liking?" Xiao Zhenye took her hand and led her inside. Yun Yuran smiled sweetly. "It's wonderful, and the palace you assigned to me is so spacious and comfortable. And I understand it's near your palace, Your Majesty." "Thank you." Lu De, overhearing the conversation, thought Yun Yuran knew exactly how to charm the emperor. No wonder His Majesty had abandoned his paperwork to rush over here, and the palace she was in had been personally chosen by His Majesty. Several other concubines had wanted to live there, including his most favored one, but he'd refused. This noble concubine got it without even trying. Xiao Zhenye felt grateful to Yun Yuran. "As long as you're happy, my dear, that's all that matters." He was glad his efforts hadn't been wasted. Since returning to the palace, he had the palace quickly cleaned and decorated. He was relieved she liked it. "Anything from you will make me happy, Your Majesty." Her mesmerizing eyes fixed on him, seemingly trying to capture his soul. She acted as if the emperor was her whole world, which pleased Xiao Zhenye. He felt like he was floating on cloud 9. "If you like it, I'll have them give you more things in the future." "Thank you, Your Majesty. I'm truly grateful." She knelt to express her thanks. Xiaojinye squeezed her hand. Ran, there's no need for such formality. As long as it pleases you, it's all worthwhile. Now that they were alone, except for Luda and Chunhua, Xiaojinye stopped calling her my dear and instead, used her name. They sat down on the couch. Xiaojinye asked, have you had lunch yet, Ran? Yun Yuran shook her head. Not yet. It's still early. I was planning to pay my respects to the Queen Mother first. Xiaojinye frowned and said gently, you've just arrived. There's no rush. You can go tomorrow. He looked at Luda. Have lunch prepared. Yes, Your Majesty. Luda bowed and left to arrange for lunch. Chunhua also excused herself. As soon as her mistress entered, the emperor had arrived. She didn't want to intrude. Now that they were alone, Yun Yuran gazed at the emperor adoringly. But wouldn't it be impolite if I didn't pay my respects to the Queen Mother right away? Xiaojinye smiled, took her hand, and squeezed it gently. What's the problem? You just got here. You should rest. She won't hold it against you. Are you sure the Queen Mother won't be upset? She asked hesitantly. Don't worry. I'll send someone to explain. She'll understand. Well, if the Queen Mother does get mad, you'll have to put in a good word for me. Of course. I'll make sure you don't get punished, but... He paused, giving Yun Yuran a meaningful look. Sensing his gaze, Yun Yuran asked tentatively, but what? As she said this, she wanted to roll her eyes. Chapter 22. After the charming concubine became pregnant, the emperor doted on him every night. 22. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Looking at Yun Yuran, who was clearly dying to know, the emperor leaned in close, whispering in her ear, if you're good tonight, I promise the empress won't punish you. I'll do whatever you ask. He pulled away, unable to hide his grin. Yun Yuran pursed her lips, glancing at him shyly. You're such a tease, Yi. She lowered her head, avoiding his gaze. He was being so secretive, just like the emperor. Xiaojinye sighed. This little imp was mimicking him, holding back half of what she wanted to say. But what? Yun Yuran looked up, a bright smile on her face. Guess. I can't. She was acting like a little kid, but remembering her past, Xiaojinye held his tongue. He'd just indulge her. I knew you couldn't. Just tell me, Xiaojinye said, feigning impatience. Okay. She leaned close to his ear, her breath warm against his skin. Even though you're a tease, that's exactly why I like you. I like everything you do. Xiaojinye's smile never faded. You little minx. Yep, I'm your personal little seductress. And you love it. You said it, not me. Of course, I love it. Xiaojinye pulled her close, his arms tight around her waist, breathing in the scent of her hair. It filled his senses, making it hard to control himself. If it weren't broad daylight, he'd pull her down and finally give vent to the desire that was eating him up inside. Yun Yuran was speechless. Why did he always bury his face in her neck? She pushed him slightly. Hey, it's the middle of the day. You have a reputation to uphold. Even if she hadn't said anything, Xiaojinye wouldn't have gone too far. He just wanted to breathe her in, to calm the fire within him. Just a moment, he murmured, holding her tight. He was breathing hard, and Yun Yuran felt the hem of her dress inching up. She froze, clutching his sleeves, her palms sweating. Here in the palace, he might lose control in broad daylight. Wouldn't that be a scandal? A new concubine seducing the emperor in the middle of the day. The court would have a field day. Even if the emperor couldn't control himself, everyone would blame the favored concubine, not him. Finally, Xiaojinye raised his head and gently settled Yun Yuran back on the couch. Luda, serve lunch. Luda had been waiting outside, not daring to move in case the emperor called. Knowing the emperor was with his concubine, he was careful not to disturb them. He'd instructed the other servants to be quiet too. Yes, Your Majesty, Luda's thin voice responded from outside. He gestured to the servants to hurry. then carefully opened the door. A procession of exquisite dishes were placed on the table, making Yun Yuren's mouth water. The emperor's meals were truly something else. And today, she was lucky enough to share them. Seeing the light in her eyes, Xiao Zhenye smiled. I wanted to have lunch with you on your first day here. I hope it's to your liking. Thank you, Your Majesty. It's wonderful. She made sure to use the proper titles. Xiao Zhenye was pleased by her thoughtfulness. She didn't let her affection for him make her forget her place in front of others. He preferred her to call him Your Majesty, not a Yi. Not that he didn't like it, but he didn't want her to give anyone ammunition against her. He didn't want her to become a pawn in someone else's game. Xiao Zhenye didn't let Yun Yuran serve him. He asked her to sit and eat with him. He even placed several dishes on her plate, and she did the same for him. With just a glance, he knew what she wanted and silently put it in her bowl. She only had to look at his dish, and he understood immediately. They exchanged glances, and Lu De almost had to look away. He felt like the emperor was a young man trying to impress his sweetheart. The two maids, Chun Hua and Qiu Yu, were smiling, secretly delighted. Their mistress was loved and cherished by the emperor. It would give them prestige as well. Yun Yuran had personally chosen and named them, and now they were her head maids. Chunhua managed Yun Yuran's wardrobe and personal needs, while Chuyue oversaw the running of the palace. In total, Yun Yuran had 6 maids and eunuchs. Besides Chunhua and Chuyue, there were 2 eunuchs, 3 junior maids, and an older woman. She was called old, but she was only in her early 30s. After the emperor left, Yun Yuran asked Chuyue to gather the palace staff for a lecture. Soon, the servants assigned by the Ministry of Internal Affairs were waiting outside. Seeing Yun Yuran emerge, they knelt in unison. Greetings, Empress. She glanced at the 6 figures, sat down slowly, and surveyed them with her beautiful eyes. Seeing their new mistress was silent, they were all quiet and did not dare to express their anger. The master at the table was no good person. Finally, Yun Yuran said calmly, "You may rise." Her voice was soft and pleasant. The maids and eunuchs relaxed a little when they heard it. Yun Yuran nodded, and Chuyue stepped forward, handing each servant a small purse. Their eyes lit up at the sight of the money. They accepted the purses with smiles and thanked her. "Thank you, Empress." Yun Yuran looked at the pleasure in their eyes and said, "You're in my service now, and I won't mistreat you. If you do your jobs well, you'll be rewarded even more. I don't ask for much. Just do your duties honestly, and don't try to deceive me. If anyone harbors evil intentions, they'll be punished without mercy. Don't blame me for forgetting our bond as master and servant. Also, from now on, Chunhua and Chuyue are my head maids. They're the only ones who will serve me directly." Her words were gentle, but they were still delivered with fear. The maids and eunuchs bowed again. "Yes, Your Majesty. We will follow your instructions and never have any wrong thoughts." Chapter 23. After the charming concubine became pregnant, the emperor doted on him every night. 23. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Yun Yuran was pretty happy with how they were acting, but wasn't sure if they were being genuine. Guess she'd have to wait and see. She looked at the 2 eunuchs, one tall and one short, and asked, "What are your names?" That the short one looked young, maybe 13 or 14, they quickly replied, "I'm Little Shizi, and I'm Little Table." Little Table? She almost burst out laughing, but managed to keep a straight face. Yun Yuran said, "From now on, Little Shizi will be in charge around here. If anything needs doing, I'll leave it to you too." "Yes, Your Highness." Little Shizi was thrilled. He never expected to become head eunuch. Yun Yuran turned to the 3 maids and the nanny. "Nanny, I'm putting these 3 in your care. Chunhua and Chuyue have just come to the palace with me, and there are a lot of rules they don't know. I'd appreciate any advice you can give me, too." "Yes, Your Highness, I won't let you down. If you're not sure about something, ask Nanny or Little Shizi. If they can't decide, then come to me. Now, off you go." "Yes, Your Highness." The maids and eunuchs all left. "Nanny, stay a moment," Yun Yuran called out. The nanny looked puzzled, but lowered her head respectfully and waited. "Nanny, I'm new here and don't really understand all the relationships in the palace. I'd appreciate any guidance you can offer." Yes, I understand, the nanny replied, still respectfully. You don't have to be so formal, nanny. We're going to be living together, so relax. I was just putting on a show. I'm actually pretty easy to get along with. Very well, as your highness says. A genuine smile appeared on her face. Now she thought maybe the queen wasn't as difficult as she'd heard, and the queen was right, she had to be strict with the servants. Otherwise, they wouldn't listen, and they'd take advantage of her. Evening came quickly, and the sky grew dark. Just as dinner was being served, they heard the eunuch announce. His Majesty has arrived. Yun Yuran stood up to greet him, but the emperor was already walking through the gate. Your Majesty, she said. Xiao Zhinya took her hand. I've told you, Ran, no need to be formal with me. But your Majesty, it's the proper thing to do. Ran, in this palace, I'm in charge of what's proper, so don't worry about it so much. Besides, this is your palace. I don't think anyone would dare to gossip. His tone was calm, but his eyes scanned the room, conveying a silent threat. Everyone trembled as the emperor looked at them, feeling like they were staring into the abyss. They silently vowed to serve the queen well. Seeing the food on the table, Xiao Zhinya asked, haven't you eaten yet? Yun Yuran pretended to be shy and said, was this concubine waiting to have dinner with you, your Majesty? She looked away, as if embarrassed. Xiao Zhinya was delighted, laughed, and said in a low voice, I didn't realize Ran and I were so in sync. I haven't eaten either. I wanted to keep you company. Well, thank you for thinking of me, your Majesty, Yun Yuran said, pleased. After dinner, Xiao Zhinya and Yun Yuran went to wash up separately. Soon, Yun Yuran had finished and sat down on the bed. She was about to grab a book to pass the time when the emperor came out. Xiao Zhinya looked surprised to see she was already ready for bed. Usually, when he visited the other concubines, they would wash up first and wait for him. But Yun Yuran had waited for him. Your Majesty, Yun Yuran said, noticing his surprise, and smiled. Ran, why were you so quick? Yun Yuran blushed and said softly, I was afraid you'd want to wash up first, and I wanted to be ready for you. I couldn't bear to make you wait. I'd feel bad. The emperor waved his hand and dismissed the maids and eunuchs. Lu De bowed respectfully and took everyone with him. He gently closed the door and signaled for a maid and eunuch to get water ready. Judging from His Majesty's eagerness, he planned to spend the night here. After everyone left, Xiao Zhinya picked up Yun Yuran and carried her to the bed. Yun Yuran wrapped her arms around his neck and said shyly, I. The seductive voice made the emperor's blood rush. It was as if 1,000 ants were crawling under his skin. He gently placed Yun Yuran on the edge of the bed and sat down, gazing at her. My Ran, you're so naturally beautiful. I can hardly control myself. Yun Yuran's eyes met his, her face flushed, and she whispered, let Ran take you to the top of the mountain. She clasped his neck and kissed him. The emperor didn't hesitate. He loved her boldness. He waved his hand and extinguished the candle by the bed. Through the curtains and the moonlight, you could see them embracing, their voices rising and falling. Chunhua and Chuyue, standing outside, blushed with embarrassment, and Lu De was drenched in sweat. Although he was a eunuch, the queen's voice was very alluring. He'd never heard anything like it before. Usually, the other concubines were quiet, afraid of disturbing the emperor, but not her. She didn't hold back, and everyone outside could hear her. Xiao Zhinya loved her seductive voice, which made him feel incredibly satisfied. They made love several times that night. They called for water 5 or 6 times. When it was time for the morning court, the emperor still didn't want to leave. Yun Yuran promised him they could do it again tonight, and he finally got up, washed, and dressed. After he left, Yun Yuran collapsed on the bed, questioning her life choices. She felt like it wasn't her who'd taken the pill, but the emperor. She'd almost given out. If it hadn't been for the morning court, she would have thrown in the towel. The emperor didn't know why, but whenever he was with Yun Yuran, he felt energized. It was like he could draw life from her. Yun Yuran was upset and called out to the system, Tong, tell me, was that sentence a lie? Chapter 24. After the charming concubine became pregnant, the emperor doted on him every night. 24. You are listening at novelfull.audio. The system, freshly released from its constraints, was plagued by doubts. Which sentence is a lie? It wondered. Man, it's like that saying, only tired cows complain, but the field just sits there. Why do I feel like the old emperor is getting more energized the more he fights? I'm the one wilting. The system knew exactly why, but it wasn't telling. It wanted to laugh. How should I know? I'm not human. What do you expect? Yeah, you're useless. Annoyed, Yun Yuran yanked the quilt over her head, closed her eyes, and tried to sleep. Forget it, she thought. I'll sleep first and figure it out later. I'm beat after a long night. After morning court, the emperor headed to the Queen Mother's Shokong palace. He'd promised Yun Yuran he'd put in a good word for her with the Queen Mother. Emperor, I'm at a loss for words. Why would you bring Zi Heng's fiancé into the palace without so much as a peep to me? We should have talked about it. The Queen Mother had been furious when she found out yesterday, after the girl was already inside the palace, taking his nephew's fiancé was a bad look. The emperor was losing face. She'd held back, waiting for an explanation. Queen Mother, I had no choice. I was drugged and unconscious. When I woke up, I'd, with her. What else could I do? But she's Zi Heng's fiancé. The Queen Mother was frustrated, looking helpless. Who says she is? The Prime Minister and my brother have both confirmed that Zi Heng is engaged to the Prime Minister's legitimate daughter, Yun Weining, not Yun Yuran. Why wouldn't I take her into the palace? Emperor, you're being dense. She wanted to crack open his skull to see what was inside. Believing such a flimsy excuse. What's done is done, you wouldn't want me to be a deadbeat. Besides, this works out for everyone, right? They want to switch partners, so who are we to blame? It solves their problem, mine, and saves me a big headache. Humph, everyone thinks I'm an idiot. Mom, please, don't be mad. There's more to it than you know. This little girl's innocence was ruined because of Xiao Ziheng and Yun Weining. How so? The Queen Mother was intrigued. It's a long story. That day, I was upset about the heir situation. I wanted to talk to the abbot at Qingde Temple. I sat in the Queen's palace for a bit and had some tea. Turns out, the Queen was trying to slip me her maid and gave me something extra. Yun Yuran was tricked by her stepsister that day into going to Qingde Temple to pray. On the way back, she was kidnapped by someone sent by Xiao Ziheng, pretending to be a kidnapper. They gave her a love potion and dumped her in a ruined temple east of Qingde Temple. When she woke up, she realized she was drugged. She ran to the river to try to get it out of her system. I was on my way back to the palace, thinking of cooling off by the river. The Queen gave me a potent drug. I couldn't handle it and passed out. When I saw her coming out of the river, I ignored the little girl's resistance and ruined her innocence. When I woke up, I asked who she was and found out she was Xiao Ziheng's fiancée. I was furious, but then, when I sent her back to the Prime Minister's mansion, my brother was exchanging engagement papers between Xiao Ziheng and Yun Weining with the Prime Minister. They claimed Xiao Ziheng was always engaged to Yun Weining. Didn't that just solve my problem? I gave them my blessing on the spot. Back at the palace, I had the secret guards investigate. Turns out, the engagement was a setup. Xiao Ziheng thought he could become crown prince because of his adopted stepchild. He didn't want to marry an unpopular concubine, so he and Yun Weining cooked up a scheme to ruin Yun Yuran's reputation and break off the engagement. Yun Weining had been jealous of the engagement for ages and wanted to be the princess. They worked together. Yun Weining tricked Yun Yuran into going to Qingde Temple, and Xiao Ziheng sent the fake kidnappers. The Queen Mother cut him off. Didn't you say Yun Yuran was drugged with a love potion? How did she get away from Xiao Ziheng's men? Xiao Zhinya gave a wry smile. Xiao Ziheng just wanted to ruin her reputation. He kidnapped her and dumped her in a ruined temple. Yun Weining wanted Yun Yuran to get busy with someone sent by Xiao Ziheng, so Xiao Ziheng would hate Yun Yuran, but Xiao Ziheng's men were a bunch of bruisers. They knocked her out cold, and that's how everything happened. He was being half-truthful, leaving out the beggar. He was afraid the queen mother would think of the beggar and react badly. The queen mother sighed, not expecting Yun Yuran to suffer so much over a marriage arrangement. Fine. If that's what everyone wants, so be it. It solves this scandal for you. Mom, you're a reasonable person. Even though Ran and I met because of this mess, I really like her. I hope you won't make things difficult for her. She must be hurting. I can't give her an heir, and I don't know how she'll survive in this palace. For my sake, could you be kind to her? Hearing his plea, the queen mother sighed lovingly. Since you're asking, how can I refuse? But you really need to figure out the heir situation. The court's been at it every day, and I know you're under pressure. You'll have to adopt sooner or later. Don't keep putting it off. She felt terrible for her son. They'd relied on each other and endured so much to get him this far. He'd turned Daki around, but now he had to give up his son to someone else. It had been 19 years since he'd taken the throne. Hundreds of concubines, and none of them had gotten pregnant. The queen mother stroked her son's cheek, tears welling up. You're so disappointing. Seeing her so upset, Xiao Zhenye felt awful. Mom, I've tried. Maybe I'm just not meant to have kids. We can't force it. Let it go. He forced a smile. The queen mother looked heartbroken and changed the subject. Don't worry. Since you like this girl, I won't bother her. Live your life however you want. She didn't want to pressure him. If he lost control, he wouldn't live so comfortably anymore. Thank you, Queen Mother. Xiao Zhenye was happy. He was glad he could get this much happiness for the woman he cared for. Chapter 25. After the charming concubine became pregnant, the emperor doted on him every night. 25. You are listening at novelfull.audio. When Yun Yuran finally wakes up, the sun's already high. Your Majesty. Chunhua and Chuyue entered from outside, approaching the bed with smiles and drawing back the curtains. Is the queen awake? Yeah, what time is it? She was still groggy. Almost noon, Your Majesty, Chunhua answered. Noon already? Why didn't anyone wake me? Yun Yuran scrambled out of bed to get dressed. Your Majesty told us not to disturb you, and to let you sleep in, Chuyue explained. Chuyue brought a basin for washing, and Yun Yuran quickly freshened up. It was too late to greet the queen mother with the other concubines now. They'd be done with their visits and scattered. It felt like she'd just closed her eyes, but it was practically lunchtime. Chunhua, find me something conservative and dignified to wear. Chuyue, get some food ready. Yes, Your Majesty. The two maids scurried to their tasks. Yun Yuran got dressed, grabbed a few bites of food, called for her nanny, and set off for the queen mother's palace with Chunhua. Nanny, do you think the queen mother will be mad that I'm so late? Your Majesty, the queen mother is very kind, and you just arrived. I doubt she'll hold it against you. Yun Yuran secretly rolled her eyes. Probably not wasn't exactly reassuring, whatever, she thought, in for a penny, in for a pound, according to all those palace dramas I used to watch, the worst they can do is make me kneel. No one dies. So, bring on the kneeling. And it's all the emperor's fault anyway, she realized she'd been too busy to send someone to let him know she'd overslept. He'd promised to smooth things over with the queen mother. Following her nanny's directions, Yun Yuran rushed toward Shou Kong Palace, where the queen mother lived. Her nanny looked on in disbelief. The system chimed in, Sharan, calm down. Remember, delicate and gentle. You're about to blow your cover. Remembering herself, Yun Yuran's forehead beaded with sweat, last night, oops, she hadn't meant to. It was just that she hates losing, but the emperor didn't seem to mind. In fact, he seemed to like it. What the heck was that about? Besides, who says gentle girls can't be a little assertive? Got it, she murmured. Yun Yuran slowed her pace, taking tiny steps and pausing frequently to catch her breath. The nanny thought it was funny but didn't say anything. She'd seen it all before in the palace, concubines acting all frail and helpless while secretly being tough as nails. Nothing surprised her anymore. Yun Yuran was glad for her complicity. Nanny, if we stick together, I think we can survive this place. She took the nanny's hand. The nanny smiled faintly. I understand, Your Majesty. This palace is all about pretending. Everyone's putting on an act to please the emperor. I admire your sincerity, so I'll be honest with you. I used to work in His Majesty's palace. He was worried you'd be overwhelmed and alone, so he sent me to look after you and report back if anything happens. Don't worry, Your Majesty, I know what's what. From the moment I entered your palace, I'm yours. We rise and fall together. I know what to say and what to keep to myself. Besides, His Majesty wants me to manage your household so you don't have to worry about it. I'm not spying on you, so rest assured. Yun Yuran was surprised to learn that her nanny was planted by the emperor. But at least she was upfront about it. It didn't matter that she was the emperor's woman. She said she was loyal from the moment she'd stepped into her palace. Anyway, she wasn't worried about betrayal. The emperor trusted her, so why shouldn't she? Gaining the emperor's trust proved she was sensible and reliable. Well, Nanny's honesty proves you're on my side. As long as you're loyal, I'll take care of you. Yes, Your Majesty. Chunhua silently vowed her loyalty as well. Soon, they arrived at the Queen Mother's Shokong Palace. Xiao Zhenye and the Queen Mother were eating when a young eunuch announced, Your Majesty, Queen Mother, the new concubine has arrived to pay her respects. Xiao Zhenye answered immediately, let her in. The Queen Mother saw the corners of her son's mouth lift. She was curious what kind of woman had him so worked up. She stared at the doorway. A moment later, a beautiful girl walked in with a swaying gait. Yun Yuran bowed before the Queen Mother and the Emperor. Greetings to the Queen Mother and Your Majesty. Her voice was like birdsong, intoxicating. Her eyes were bright and lively, like autumn pools, full of life. She wore a simple, elegant light pink dress. She was like a peach blossom in bloom, so beautiful it was hard to look away. Like a fairy or a demon, the Queen Mother looked away with effort, secretly impressed. No wonder my son is so smitten he had to come here and plead her case. Even I'm floored by her beauty, and I'm practically on my way out. How could he not be moved? If I were a man, I'd be smitten too. The Queen Mother showed no emotion. Rise. Thank you, Queen Mother. Yun Yuran stood up with an apologetic look. I apologize for being so late. Xiao Zhenye quickly took her hand, looked at the Queen Mother, and said nervously, Mother, it wasn't Ran's fault. I was the one who wasn't careful last night and tired her out. Please don't blame her. Seeing the Emperor's anxious expression, the Queen Mother waved her hand. I haven't said a word yet. You're so jumpy. Do you think I'm going to eat your concubine? Thank you, Mother. Xiao Zhenye beamed, like a child getting a treat. Yun Yuran seized the moment. Thank you, Queen Mother, for your understanding. Chapter 26. After the charming concubine became pregnant, the Emperor doted on him every night. 26. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Seeing the Emperor's happy face, the Queen Mother sighed inwardly. If it had been any other time, and he'd been this smitten with a woman, she would have stepped in, but now, she wanted her son to be happy. The previous administration had already put him under enough pressure. She didn't need to add to it. She'd also given up on the idea of him producing an heir. She just didn't care who he favored anymore. It didn't matter. Xiao Zhenye asked, Ran, have you eaten? Yun Yuran smiled demurely. Yes, I ate a little bit earlier. She really wanted to admit she'd been too eager to pay her respects to the Queen Mother and only managed a few bites, but no way. Looking at the food on the table, her eyes sparkled. Seeing her expression, Xiao Zhenye knew she hadn't eaten enough. He took her hand and led her to the table. Even if Ran's already eaten, she can still join Mom and me for a bit. Yun Yuran almost sat down right away, but with the Queen Mother present, she hesitated. Your Majesty, it wouldn't be proper. How could I eat at the same table as the Queen Mother? Watching them go back and forth, the Queen Mother felt a pang of sympathy. She went to the table and sat down. Enough. Don't be silly. I'm not going to bite you. The Emperor wants you to sit down and eat with us, so just sit. Yes, Your Majesty, Yun Yuan replied, dropping the formality and taking a seat. The Queen Mother said to her head maid, Guizhi, tell them to bring another set of dishes. Yes. Grandma Guizhi went to tell the cooks to set another place. Guizhi was the Queen Mother's personal attendant, practically raised alongside her before coming to the palace, and had been at her side ever since. The Queen Mother studied Yun Yuan. Though striking, she was well behaved. The Queen Mother couldn't help but feel a little more warmth toward her. After lunch, the Queen Mother turned to Yun Yuan. You're stunning. How have I never seen you at a banquet? Or even heard your name mentioned, that she figured anyone with a daughter this beautiful would be eager to show her off, so how was it she'd remained a secret? Your Majesty, I always worried my appearance would bring trouble, so I kept myself hidden. No one's ever seen me like this, plus, my mother-in-law and sister-in-law warned me that the outside world wasn't safe, so for my own protection, I never left the Prime Minister's residence as a child. If my sister-in-law hadn't repeatedly asked me to go to Qingda Temple to burn incense, I might never have left the house. I just never imagined fate would be so kind as to let me meet His Majesty during that one trip. Her voice was calm, steady, and honest, yet only she could understand the bitterness behind her words. Realizing this girl was being used and didn't even know it, the Queen Mother sighed. I've misjudged you. That it was truly awful for a young girl to be schemed against by her fiancé and sister-in-law the very first time she left home. Your Majesty, I'm not upset at all. Meeting Your Majesty and earning his favor is the luckiest thing that's ever happened to me. I couldn't be happier. How could I be upset? Besides, meeting His Majesty must be a blessing earned over many lifetimes. The Queen Mother wanted to say, what blessing? If you had a choice, would you pick a husband who couldn't give you children? The Queen Mother tested her. Since you've never been out, have you heard any rumors about the Emperor? Xiao Jinye's face tightened, and a flash of pain flickered in his eyes. Every time his ability to bear children was mentioned, he couldn't hide his emotions. No matter how quick he was, people who didn't know him well couldn't notice it. I have. Yun Yuan said, looking at him with admiration, her eyes full of thoughts of the Emperor's achievements. What have you heard? The Queen Mother asked, surprised. If she'd heard rumors, she must know he couldn't have children, so what was with the admiration? I've heard that His Majesty is frugal and cares for his people, wise and decisive, strict with laws and discipline, organized in all internal affairs, forgiving and open to advice. He works hard to govern, appoints talented people, and rules with determination. She had worn all sorts of clothes, but she can't wear them all, so she picked up a lot of nice idioms and said a lot. She looked at the Emperor and said, Daki is now prosperous, the country is rich and the people are strong, and the people live and work in peace and contentment, and have no worries about food and clothing, all of which are inseparable from Your Majesty's management. Xiao Jinye's heart suddenly seemed to be touched by something, and a current penetrated his whole body. He hadn't realized that he was so important to her. Seeing how delighted the Queen Mother and the Emperor were, Yun Yuan knew she was doing a good job of flattering them. Didn't you hear anything else? The Queen Mother pressed, not giving up. Yun Yuan looked confused and shook her head. Nothing else. About heirs? Yun Yuan looked puzzled. What problems could there be with heirs? It made sense for a woman who'd never left the house to be ignorant about such things. Then how did you learn about all those good things you were saying about the Emperor? I overheard the servants talking about what's going on outside. You just guessed all that? Well, if Daki wasn't stable, how could the country prosper and the people thrive? Since the people are happy and secure, there must be a wise ruler at the helm. Okay, she's got a point. Thinking back to the topic of heirs, the Queen Mother was speechless. She entered the palace yesterday, and I bet she doesn't even know the Emperor can't have an heir. When the topic of heirs came up, Yun Yuan blushed and lowered her voice. When I left home yesterday, my aunt told me not to worry about the family, but to serve Your Majesty well and give him an heir, to carry on the royal line, but I just arrived. Even if I want to give His Majesty an heir, it can't happen that fast. Thinking about last night, her face flushed deeper with embarrassment, and she lowered her head, avoiding Xiao Xinye's gaze. Seeing her bashful expression, the queen mother knew she was a simple, innocent girl who didn't realize she was being used by her aunt, who'd made it sound like it was for her own good. "Didn't your aunt say anything more?" Yun Yuran replied softly. "Those were her main points. She didn't want to put pressure on me, and my birth mother and aunt feel the same way. I just want to serve your majesty well and, hopefully, bear his children." Okay, the queen mother had heard enough. She clearly doesn't know. Yun Yuran was starting to feel tired, so she decided to head back. She stood and said respectfully, "Your Majesty, Queen Mother, I'll leave you now. Having only just arrived, I have some personal affairs to attend to in the palace." "All right, off you go," the Queen Mother said. Xiao Xinye smiled. "I'll come see you tonight." "Yes, I'll be waiting." After Yun Yuran left, the Queen Mother turned to the Emperor. "What are you going to do about the Queen trying to poison you?" Chapter 27. After the charming concubine became pregnant, the Emperor doted on him every night. 27. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Mom, we can't move against the Queen just yet. We're at a crucial point in choosing an heir. I'm worried that if I make a move against her, Zhang Yini will go ballistic to protect her. Besides, isn't her brother, General Ding Yuan, still guarding the border? A rebellion would cost them more than they could gain. She has no kids, so why would they rebel? Mom, you're sheltered here and don't know much about the previous dynasty. Her father, Zhang Yini, has already reached an understanding with my uncle. Once I formally adopt Xiao Ziheng, they'll push hard to make him the crown prince and ensure he inherits the throne. That's their plan. I learned about this, so I visited the queen's palace to see if she was involved, and that's when I was drugged. He learned that the queen wasn't involved and was still secretly trying to get him to take a concubine. Zhang Yini clearly didn't want to tell her anything until his plan was finalized. If the queen didn't have a general for a brother who could help him rise to power, he wouldn't have married her in the first place. While he didn't love her, they respected each other and never clashed, even when she was a bit ruthless. He tolerated it for the sake of the country's stability, but now, Zhang Yini is colluding with Xiao Mintian, so it's no wonder he's turning ruthless. He sent people to the border repeatedly to investigate Zhang Feng, to see if he was acting suspicious, but they found nothing. He wasn't sure if he was too cautious or if he had no bad intentions. Regardless, as the Emperor of Daki, he had to be extremely careful to prevent anyone from causing trouble and harming the country, all for the sake of his people. If anything bad happens, it's the people who suffer, and Daki will fall apart again. He'd worked so hard to bring peace and prosperity to the country, and he couldn't bear to see it ruined. His father had too many sons, and was old and incompetent. The princes formed cliques for their own gain, and the emperor ignored them, causing the country to fall into chaos. He saw the devastation firsthand at a young age and felt heartbroken. That's when he started planning a way out with his mother. He's worked hard for 19 years. As the country thrives, he has no heir, and he might have to hand over the country to someone else. The thought made him sick. Why was God so unfair? He felt he had done nothing wrong and had never harmed his people. Why couldn't God give him a child? He wanted Daki to continue its peace and prosperity forever. Seeing the emperor lost in thought, the queen mother knew he was overthinking again. Her heart ached for him. She looked at him with love and comforted him softly. Your Majesty, don't dwell on it. We've done our best. We've honored our ancestors and served our people. Don't force what can't be. While you're still in power, continue to take care of this country and find more ways to help the people. Once you step down, we won't have any control. Mom, Xiao Xinye said with a complicated look. He didn't want to overthink, but he couldn't help it. Maybe he was just born to worry. He couldn't bear to see his people suffer. He couldn't control other countries, but he couldn't neglect those under his rule. It was his duty and his burden as a royal. Your Majesty, let fate run its course. We're just mortals. We should serve the people, be true to ourselves, and honor heaven and earth. The Queen Mother's words were gentle and comforting. Xiao Xinye's mood gradually calmed. Yes, Mom, you're right. I won't force what can't be. I'll focus on doing my job. It would be good for me to do more for the people during my reign. Good. As long as you understand. It's getting late. You shouldn't waste time here with me. Go and take care of government affairs. Yes, Queen Mother. I'll take my leave. Xiao Zhenye stood up, bowed respectfully to the Queen Mother, and returned to handle government matters. After the Emperor left, Guizhi wiped her tears and said, "Your Majesty is so pitiful. Why is God so unfair?" That the Queen Mother listened to Guizhi's words and sighed, "Yes. He cares so much about the country and the people, so why not give him an heir? Even a princess would be something, at least a glimmer of hope. Even a princess would be enough." She believed, the Emperor could promote a princess to the throne. It was better for his own heir to take over than to give it to someone else. The late Emperor had many heirs, but many died, were injured, or imprisoned. No matter how many heirs there were still a few who had some ability. Seeing that the Emperor has no heir, and because of the issue of adopted heirs, I think those dissatisfied people will come out and start acting again. He's in a tough spot. If he had a princess, he wouldn't be so troubled. He's the Emperor, he can do whatever he wants. I can't help him. The only thing I can do is not cause him any trouble. When Xiao Zhenye was present, she didn't dare show her despair, she only felt heartache and pity. The Queen Mother now looked saddened, her face filled with worry. Guizhi helped her up and comforted her. "Queen Mother, don't think too much. There's always a way. Did you ever think that His Majesty could be crowned with such a weak crown? Didn't it come through smoothly as usual? Although it has been a bit hard, since His Majesty ascended the throne, everything has been smooth, except for the heirs, but there is nothing that has gone smoothly. Indeed, God hadn't been too cruel to the Emperor. Apart from having no heir, it seemed that God had not treated him badly either. There were no major natural or man-made disasters for him, and there were only minor troubles. Only then was it possible for His Majesty to move forward safely and create this prosperous scene where the country is rich and the people are strong, and the people live and work in peace and contentment. If there is a major natural disaster, no matter how powerful the Emperor is, he is just a mortal. How can he fight against the gods? Maybe God wants to test him to see if he can overcome this obstacle too." This is what she said and thought now, but it didn't take long for her words to come true. "I hope so." The Queen Mother frowned, feeling a headache coming on. "Your Majesty, you have a headache again?" Guizhi asked with concern. The Queen Mother nodded. "Maybe I was overthinking just now. I'll help you lie down and give you a massage." "Guizhi, I'm grateful you've been with me all these years." The Queen Mother gently held her hand. "What are you talking about? Aren't you also accompanying me? If you hadn't taken me in, I'd be dead. There wouldn't be a Guizhi now." Chapter 28. After the charming concubine became pregnant, the Emperor doted on him every night. 28. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Luda, what time is it? After returning from Shokong Palace, Xiao Zhenye had been buried in paperwork. He hadn't realized how late it had gotten until he put down his pen and looked up. "Your Majesty, it's already 6 p.m., Luda replied, approaching the Emperor. Xiao Zhenye rubbed his temples, trying to ease the tension. 6 p.m. already? Then let's head over to Mengyu Palace. He'd chosen Mengyu Palace for Yun Yuran for a couple of reasons. First, the name contained the same U as her name. Second, it was close to his own residence. Plus, she was the woman of his dreams, so he'd wanted to give her something special. Giving her that palace felt like a no-brainer. "Yes, Your Majesty." Outside Mengyu Palace, Xiao Zhenye gazed up at the plaque hanging above the vermilion gate, emblazoned with the name in red gold lettering. He thought to himself that many concubines had coveted this spacious palace so close to the Emperor, but he'd never considered giving it to any of them. It felt like fate, as if it had been waiting for her all along. Yun Yuran had returned from Shokong Palace and taken a nap. After waking up and freshening up, she instructed her attendant to prepare a meal. Anticipating the Emperor's arrival, he promised to come tonight, and she knew he wouldn't break his word, especially after promising that morning. Just as the food was being set, Xiao Shizi announced, "Your Majesty has arrived." Yun Yuran gracefully exited the palace just as the Emperor stepped inside. Luda promptly called out, His Majesty is here. Yun Yuran approached the emperor, curtsying. Greetings, Your Majesty. Rise, Xiao Zhenye said, gently touching her soft, white hand. Thank you, Your Majesty. Yun Yuran's face lit up with excitement, as if seeing the emperor in her palace was the greatest joy. And in truth, it was. In the past, when the emperor visited a concubine's palace, she'd always be just as thrilled. He was used to it, but seeing Yun Yuran so animated made him feel genuinely happy, his heart skipping a beat. Xiao Zhenye held Yun Yuran's hand as they walked. Have you been waiting long? I'm always happy to wait for Your Majesty, she replied softly. Such sweet talk, Xiao Zhenye said, a doting look on his face. You know just how to charm me. Your Majesty, she murmured, lowering her voice. Is it sweet? Hasn't I already tasted it? Her eyes flickered, avoiding his gaze, overcome with shyness. Xiao Zhenye's lips curved into a smile, the weariness from earlier vanished. Breathing in her sweet fragrance, he felt invigorated. She squeezed his hand tightly and said earnestly, besides, I'm not just trying to butter you up. These words come straight from the heart. I'm just telling the truth. Xiao Zhenye felt his affection for her deepening, wanting to lay bare his heart and show her how deeply he cared. After dinner, they went to wash up. This time, the emperor didn't linger. He knew Yun Yuran was quick, usually out of the bath in 15 minutes. Yun Yuran also washed quickly, not needing to be overly meticulous. She took a quick bath and came out without applying any lotion. Chunhua Chuyue offered to apply lotion, but she declined. Her skin was already smooth and creamy, needing nothing extra. The system's pills weren't free. After all, when she joined the emperor, he was reading a book. She felt a little awkward since it was just a collection of random notes. The original owner had bought it to pass the long, lonely nights. When she entered the palace, she'd packed it up and brought it with her. Chunhua Chuyue had taken it out and placed it on the desk earlier while unpacking. She hadn't had a chance to look at it herself. The emperor set down the book and looked at Yun Yuran. Do you enjoy reading, Ran? Yes, I had someone buy it a while ago. It helped pass the time when I was bored. Since you love reading so much, I'll have Lu to find some books that women enjoy. You can read them when I'm not here. Thank you, Your Majesty. Yun Yuran beamed and waved her hand at the maids and eunuchs. Her attendant, ever perceptive, led them out. Lu De followed, leaving only the emperor and Yun Yuran. Now alone, Yun Yuran nestled in the emperor's arms and called out sweetly, Yi is so good to Ran, and Ran loves Yi very much. Then, she leaned in and kissed his thin lips, gently nibbling, caressing, and exploring with her tongue. Her eyes were tender and lingering, endlessly captivating, and a blush spread across her face, like an enchanting fairy bewitching hearts and souls. No man could resist the advances of his beloved, and Xiao Zhenye was no exception. The self-control he prided himself on always crumbled before Yun Yuran, vanishing completely. Even with 1,000 troops, he'd lay down his arms, allowing her to do as she pleased. Heat surged through him, his eyes filled with desire, his large hands gripping her slender waist tightly. The candlelight flickered, and his kisses trailed down her neck, leaving a trail of blossoming sensations. A suppressed excitement, like a volcano on the verge of eruption. Give it to me. She pushed the emperor back onto the couch, her lips slightly parted. The emperor's heart soared, as if transported to heaven, enveloped in divine energy. His breathing grew heavy, strained and shallow. Xiao Zhenye sat up, took her chin, and looked at her swollen lips, smiling seductively. Little fairy, you may be petite, but you have incredible power hidden inside you. That's what makes Yi so happy, she replied, her eyes filled with allure, her voice both hesitant and seductive. The only answer she received was the back of his head, as he got to work. Another night filled with passion, a symphony of moans and gasps from the woman, punctuated by the emperor's guttural growls. In the morning, Xiao Zhenye strode to the throne with renewed vigor, feeling younger than ever. Long live the emperor! May you all be well. Xiao Zhenye's majestic voice echoed through the hall. After the ministers rose, Lu De announced, if there are any matters to be brought before the court, speak now. Otherwise, the court will adjourn. Wu Shangshu stepped forward and said loudly, Your Majesty, I have a matter to report. The emperor knew they were going to bring up the succession again. Although he was annoyed, he didn't show it. My dear official, if you intend to discuss the adoption of an heir, I'd rather you didn't. Wu Shangshu shook his head helplessly. Though he said nothing, he remained standing, refusing to step back into the ranks. He was waiting for someone else to take the lead. Then the general of the auxiliary state stepped forward and saluted respectfully. Your Majesty, the matter of an heir can no longer be delayed. How can the country be stable without a prince? Xiao Zhenye was furious. According to you, I've been on the throne for 19 years without an heir. Does that mean the people aren't happy, the country isn't stable, and Daki isn't prosperous? Your Majesty, don't misunderstand. Without a crown prince, who will inherit the Great Qi Kingdom? How can the prosperous Great Qi Kingdom continue without an heir? Chapter 29. After the charming concubine became pregnant, the emperor doted on him every night. 29. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Your Majesty, how can there be any confusion? Without a crown prince, who will inherit the Great Qi Kingdom? A prosperous nation needs an heir to continue. The general spoke his mind, unafraid of angering the emperor, as he had the country's best interest at heart. He knew the emperor wasn't always easy to deal with, but he listened to honest, even if unpleasant, advice, so he wasn't worried. Besides, for the sake of Daki, he was willing to risk his title. His conscience was clear. As others prepared to speak up, the emperor calmly interrupted, My lords, your points are valid. I will consider whom to adopt. Yun Qian stepped forward. Your Majesty, Prince Xiao is virtuous and resourceful. He's shrewd, capable, and decisive, a fine candidate for adoption. Xiao Zhenye's deep eyes narrowed as he fixed a knowing look on Yun Qian. Prince Xiao and the Prime Minister seem quite close. I trust there are no personal motivations at play. Yun Qian felt the emperor's gaze and said nervously, Your Majesty, Prince Xiao is indeed capable. I simply speak my mind. As for my relationship with the prince, your Majesty himself arranged the marriage between my daughter and the prince. He trailed off, the implication clear. Xiao Zhenye dismissed him, looking away. If it wasn't to break off Ran Rant's engagement to Xiao Ziheng, he would have gladly seen those two ambitious people married. Fortunately, they were both ruthless and could now join forces against Wenchuan Prince's mansion. Lin Xing, a high-ranking official, stood up. Your Majesty, I concur with the Prime Minister. With proper training after adoption, Prince Xiao is capable of handling the crown. This is his future grandson-in-law. Once the adoption goes through, he will become the future prince. His eyes darted towards the dragon throne beneath the emperor. He was beside himself with excitement just thinking about it. Do you all wish I'd adopt an heir so I can step aside for your chosen successor? Xiao Zhenye's face darkened, and his eyes swept over the court, cold and piercing, like a bottomless icy pool. Everyone he looked at felt a chill, as if they'd been plunged into an ice cellar. The emperor turned to Xiao Mintian. What are your thoughts, brother? Xiao Mintian replied respectfully, Your Majesty, I defer to your judgment. I have no objections. Could he provide input? If he could, he of course would be glad if the emperor adopted his son soon and then name his son the prince. The scholar also rose. Your Majesty, honest words may be hard to hear, but they benefit action. Though my words may be blunt, they are truthful. You should delay the matter of an heir no longer. Xiao Zhenye, furious, barely contained his anger. I know, I will provide an answer soon. Court is adjourned. Lu De announced loudly, Court is adjourned. We respectfully take our leave, Your Majesty, the courtiers said in unison. Xiao Zhenye left without a backward glance. Every day, all everyone wants is for me to hurry up and get an heir, and for me to give up my throne to someone they deem worthy. It's not like I'm on my deathbed. Am I not in my prime? So urgent. Lu De hurried after the emperor, knowing he was upset and followed silently, not wanting to disturb him. Xiao Zhenye, in a foul mood, wandered to Mengyu Hall. The thought of its occupant softened his expression. Even if I lost everything, at least I'd have her. As Lu De prepared to announce their arrival, Xiao Zhenye stopped him, guessing Yun Yuran was still asleep. Mengyu Palace was quiet, seemingly deserted. Xiao Zhenye entered, waving off the maids and eunuchs who rushed to greet him. The palace staff, sensing his mood, bowed and quietly resumed their duties. Grandma opened the door to the palace. Xiao Zhinya entered, while Luda and Grandma stood silently outside. Xiao Zhinya tiptoed to the couch. Seeing Yun Yuran sleeping peacefully, he felt a surge of contentment. He couldn't explain why, but being near her always stirred something within him. There was something addictive about her, her scent, the soft touch of her skin. He removed his boots and slipped into bed, wrapping his arms around Yun Yuran, inhaling her comforting fragrance, and drifted into a deep sleep. An hour later, Yun Yuran stirred and opened her eyes. A handsome face greeted her, and she gasped. Frozen in place, she stared at the sleeping emperor. He held her close, one hand around her waist, the other under her neck. She was pressed against him, one hand touching his firm abs, a foot straddling his lower abdomen. It was embarrassing where her thighs rested, and she thought that if she moved, her head would rise there immediately. Terrified of waking him or being caught in such an unseemly position, she remained still, unable to sleep. She quietly admired his features. Although the emperor is indeed quite old, he is handsome, with three-dimensional facial features as handsome as a knife, and his whole person exudes the aura of a king who looks down on the world. Anyway, he is wild but not arrogant, humble but not inferior, decisive but resolute. 15 minutes later, the emperor still hadn't stirred. Her limbs were going numb, so she carefully tried to shift. Gently, she moved her hand and foot. As she lifted her foot to move it, a large hand pressed it back down. A jolt of heat surged through her. Her face flushed red, like a cooked shrimp. She looked up to see the emperor watching her with a mischievous grin, as if he'd caught her doing something wrong. Yun Yuran gave an awkward smile and waved her arm. Hey, are you awake? Yes, he said, his voice still rough with sleep. He had been awake for a while. Yun Yuran's gaze was so intense and obvious that it had roused him. He had heard her whispering her admiration, which pleased him, so he pretended to sleep, enjoying her assessment. So, Ran has admired me enough and is satisfied with my appearance. Is it something Ran likes in my heart? That the emperor tightened his grip on her waist, grinning. If Ran hasn't appreciated it enough, I can continue to pretend to be asleep so that Ran can appreciate it enough. Mortified by his teasing, Yun Yuran covered her face with her hands. Anyway, as long as she is not embarrassed, others will be embarrassed. Xiao Zhinya chuckled, a deep and charming sound, and gently pulled her hands away from her face. Ha ha ha. Is Ran trying to hide her ears? Chapter 30. After the charming concubine became pregnant, the emperor doted on him every night. 30. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Hearing the emperor's laughter, Yun Yuran uncovered her eyes and playfully tapped his chest. Her eyes sparkled with charm as she said, "Oh, Yi, you're teasing me. Was I so wrong to be distracted by your good looks? Is it so bad to admire my husband?" Xiao Zhinya kissed her pouting lips and replied, "No, you're right. Everything you say is right." "Humph, of course," she said, gazing at him with a hint of coy affection. "Such a delicate thing," he murmured, gently pinching her soft, white cheeks. Her skin was so tender, like silken tofu, that he barely applied any pressure. Even so, a faint red mark appeared where his fingers had been. Yun Yuran pouted and blinked. "That's because you spoil me, Yi." The emperor clearly adored her, treating her like a cherished daughter. He deepened the moment with another passionate kiss, which she happily returned. If it weren't broad daylight, he would have loved to hold her down, tease her relentlessly, and watch her beg for mercy. They nuzzled each other, and as she lay in his arms, Yun Yuran traced circles on his chest with her finger. "Yi," she asked sweetly, "it's been 3 days since I came to the palace, and I haven't visited the queen once. Do you think she'll be angry?" Xiao Zhinya's eyes were focused on her, his tone gentle and doting. "Don't worry. As long as I'm here, she won't show any displeasure outwardly. Besides, I send someone to ask for leave on your behalf every day. She'll give me some face, at least." "Thank you, Yi. You're so good to me. You always say such sweet things. How will you repay me?" Let me think," she said, pretending to ponder the question. After a moment, she perked up. How about I give you a child? That he didn't react, masking his emotions with a smile. Okay, I'll be waiting. Yun Yuran patted her stomach and looked at him excitedly. Aye, maybe there's already a baby in here. That was fast, he responded playfully. Hee, we've been together so often, anything's possible. Imagine, a sweet, cuddly baby, a boy, just like you, handsome, wealthy, clever, and invincible, and a daughter, like me, smart, virtuous, charming, and capable. The emperor watched her, lost in her fantasy, and couldn't bring himself to break the spell. He pinched her nose and teased, capable. I haven't noticed that about you. Conquering a country is another thing. Yun Yuran pouted, indignant. Hey, who are you underestimating? If I can win over a man like you, isn't that proof enough? That he couldn't help but smile, his face full of affection. Yes, my Ran is the most shrewd and capable of all. I'm helpless against your charms. Ha! Yun Yuran beamed with delight. The emperor couldn't bring himself to tell her that he couldn't let her have a child, so he allowed her to remain blissfully unaware for the time being. She was new to the palace, and he was spoiling her. No one would dare to confront her with such news just yet. Ran, I need to take care of some official business. I'll have Lu to bring you a book soon. Okay, I'll be waiting. After having lunch with Yun Yuran, the emperor returned to his duties. Meanwhile, thunder seemed to erupt in the queen's palace. That little hussy. She enters the palace and immediately starts seducing His Majesty. 3 days, and she hasn't even bothered to visit me. She has no respect for this queen. Your Majesty, please calm down. I think His Majesty is simply caught up in a passing infatuation. After a few days, he'll tire of her and naturally return to your side. Smack, the queen slapped Zhang Miao across the face, her expression twisted with rage. A passing infatuation? You couldn't even keep His Majesty interested for a single moment. What chance do you have of making him tire of her? I've been plotting and planning for you, creating these opportunities. If you can't even seize them, what right do you have to remain in this palace? That the queen was furious. She had created the perfect opportunity, even arranging for them to have some alone time. And yet, Zhang Miao had failed to hold His Majesty's attention. It must have been that little tramp who had used a strong love potion to seduce him. Otherwise, why would His Majesty have left the palace only to immediately send for her on the 3rd day? He even moved her into Menu Palace, the closest to him, a palace nearly as grand as her own. She'd heard that a previous emperor had it built for his favorite concubine, so it was incredibly spacious, not much different from the queen's residence. But as soon as the palace was finished, it was discovered that the concubine was a spy from another country. The palace was sealed off. The late emperor never allowed anyone to live there again. He reasoned that his father had built it for his beloved concubine, and since he had no favorite concubine, the palace was only occasionally visited and cleaned. When His Majesty came into power, many concubines wanted to live there because it was so close to him, but he refused to allow anyone to move in, and now, this little hussy had lucked out. She had only just entered the palace and was already living in the palace of everyone's dreams. Had she given His Majesty some kind of ecstasy? How else would he treat her like this? Zhang Miao covered her burning cheek, her ears ringing. She felt humiliated, but in front of the queen, she had to remain strong and endure it. Your Majesty, I'm so sorry. I've disappointed you. It's all my fault. She hadn't wanted to enter the palace at all, let alone become the emperor's concubine, but as a helpless orphan, she had no voice. Her aunt was Zhang Yunyi's 19th concubine. She had been elevated to that position when she became pregnant. However, her aunt had suffered a severe hemorrhage during childbirth, leaving her an orphan. Because she was Zhang Yunyi's daughter, she had taken pity on her and asked another aunt to raise her. Although she hadn't starved, life hadn't been easy. 2 months ago, Zhang Yunyi had suddenly approached her and asked her to come to the palace to keep the queen company. There was no way to refuse, so she had no choice but to enter the palace. After arriving, she realized that the queen's true purpose in having her there was to make her a concubine for the emperor. She was meant to serve him and see if she could conceive an heir. After all, Zhang Yuni was getting older, and her aunt had conceived her. Perhaps she could be as lucky as her aunt and bear His Majesty's child. The queen was powerful, and she, a mere concubine, had no right to object. She could only obey.